The strongest people are not always the ones who keep walking, but the ones who refuse to leave someone behind. Dark storm clouds rolled across the foothills outside Seattle as steady autumn rain soaked the narrow trail leading toward a proposed construction site deep inside a protected woodland. Company representatives hurried between vehicles carrying blueprints beneath waterproof folders, while impatient voices competed with the sound of distant thunder. Lauren Mitchell tightened the collar of her elegant white business coat before carefully stepping over a patch of uneven ground. As the chief executive officer of Mitchell Innovations, she insisted on personally inspecting every major project before giving final approval. Investors admired her determination. Employees respected her leadership. Yet very few people understood how exhausting it had become to carry the expectations of an entire corporation every single day. Several yards ahead, engineers called for everyone to return before the weather became worse. The rain had transformed the hillside into slippery mud, making every step more dangerous than the last. Lauren attempted to follow the group, but one sudden movement caused her foot to slide awkwardly against a hidden tree root. She caught herself before falling completely, yet a sharp pain immediately spread through her ankle. She inhaled slowly, hoping it would disappear, but when she tried to stand fully, the pain forced her back down. "Keep moving," one supervisor called from farther up the trail. "We will send someone back once we reach the service road." Lauren nodded despite knowing he could barely hear her through the rain. Within moments, the others disappeared beyond the trees, promising help would return as quickly as possible. Silence slowly settled over the forest except for falling rain tapping gently against colorful autumn leaves. Nearly half a mile away, Nathan Carter finished repairing a damaged fence surrounding a nearby family-owned orchard. He loaded his tools into the bed of his aging pickup truck before beginning the drive home. His 12-year-old son, Mason, would soon finish soccer practice, and Friday evenings always belonged to the two of them. They usually stopped for burgers before spending the evening repairing old furniture together inside the small workshop behind their modest home. Life had never been easy since Nathan lost his wife years earlier, yet every challenge had quietly taught him that showing up for people mattered more than making perfect plans. As his truck rounded a bend near the wooded access road, he noticed fresh tire tracks, several parked construction vehicles, and one figure sitting alone beneath a tall cedar tree. He slowed immediately. Rain continued falling across the empty trail, while the woman carefully tried once more to stand before quietly sitting back down. Nathan stepped from his truck, grabbed an extra waterproof jacket from the passenger seat, and walked toward her without hesitation. "Are you all right?" he asked gently. Lauren managed a polite smile despite the obvious discomfort. "I wish I could honestly say yes." Nathan knelt beside her, careful not to invade her personal space. "Can you move your foot?" She nodded slightly before trying again and immediately stopped. "Not very well." Nathan looked toward the deserted trail stretching uphill. "Did someone stay with you?" Lauren lowered her eyes for only a moment. "They went to find help." Nathan quietly removed the spare jacket from his shoulder and placed it around her to shield her from the cold rain. "Then until they come back," he said with calm certainty, "you will not be waiting here alone." Lauren studied the stranger standing beside her. He had never asked her name, her profession, or why expensive survey vehicles surrounded the forest. He simply chose to stay. In that quiet moment beneath the rain-filled Seattle sky, the successful woman everyone believed could handle everything suddenly discovered that the greatest strength often arrived wearing muddy work boots, carrying a weathered toolbox, and refusing to walk away. Rain continued falling in steady waves across the quiet hillside, while Nathan looked carefully around the deserted trail, measuring every possible way to keep Lauren safe until help arrived. He removed a thick emergency blanket from the storage compartment behind the seat of his pickup truck before gently spreading it beneath the shelter of a large cedar tree. "You should stay as warm as possible," he said calmly. Lauren accepted the blanket with a grateful smile. "You seem prepared for everything." Nathan laughed softly. "Years of working outdoors teach you a few useful habits." He returned to his truck and brought back a small insulated thermos. "Coffee." Lauren hesitated for a moment before accepting the warm cup with both hands. "Thank you." The heat slowly returned to her fingers while the rich aroma drifted into the cool autumn air. Neither of them spoke for several moments. The rain created a peaceful rhythm against the leaves overhead, while distant thunder rolled gently across the mountains. Lauren realized she could not remember the last time she had simply sat still without checking emails, answering phone calls, or preparing for another meeting. Nathan finally broke the silence. "Do you have family waiting for you?" Lauren looked down at the steaming coffee before answering honestly. "Not nearby." Nathan nodded without asking another question. He understood that some answers carried stories people were not ready to tell. Instead, he looked toward the muddy trail leading back to the construction vehicles. "Someone will come. Until then, there is no reason to worry." Lauren watched him with quiet curiosity. "You say that as though waiting does not bother you." Nathan smiled. "I have a 12-year-old son. Parenthood teaches patience whether you want to learn it or not." Lauren laughed for the first time that afternoon. "What is his name?" "Mason," Nathan answered proudly. "He believes I can fix almost anything, although I try very hard not to disappoint him." Lauren imagined the quiet life he described and found herself strangely comforted by the picture. "He must be proud of you." Nathan shrugged gently. "I hope he learns that showing up for people matters more than impressing them." Those words settled quietly between them while the rain gradually softened. After another half hour, Lauren carefully tried to stand again, but immediately lost her balance. Without hesitation, Nathan stepped closer and offered his arm. He never rushed her. He never lifted her without permission. He simply stood beside her until she felt steady enough to lean lightly against him. "Better?" he asked. She nodded. "Much better." They managed only a few careful steps before the pain returned. Nathan guided her back to the blanket with patient reassurance. "There is no prize for pretending you are stronger than your ankle." Lauren smiled with gentle embarrassment. "I spend most of my life pretending I can handle everything." Nathan looked toward the cloudy sky before quietly replying, "Everyone needs help sometimes. Accepting it does not make us weaker." His simple words reached deeper than he could possibly know. For years, Lauren had carried the weight of leading thousands of employees, believing vulnerability belonged to everyone except herself. Sitting beside a stranger who expected nothing from her, she suddenly felt safe enough to stop pretending. A rescue vehicle finally appeared at the far end of the trail, its headlights glowing through the fading rain. Several company employees hurried toward them with obvious relief. One manager called out, "Ms. Mitchell, we have been looking everywhere for you." Nathan looked briefly toward Lauren, surprised to hear the formal title, but he asked no questions. He simply helped her carefully to the waiting vehicle before stepping back. Lauren looked at him with sincere gratitude. "I never even asked your name." Nathan smiled warmly beneath the clearing sky. "Nathan Carter." She repeated it quietly, determined never to forget it. As the rescue team prepared to leave, Lauren realized that during the longest afternoon she had experienced in years, the one person who knew the least about her had somehow cared for her the most. 3 days after the storm, soft morning sunlight reflected across the glass towers of downtown Seattle, while Lauren Mitchell stood inside her executive office overlooking the city she had spent years helping to build. Her ankle had improved enough for her to walk slowly without assistance. Yet her thoughts continued returning to the quiet stranger who had refused to leave her alone beneath the cedar trees. Throughout countless meetings, she found herself remembering simple details instead of financial reports. She remembered the spare jacket placed gently around her shoulders without hesitation. She remembered the warm coffee shared beneath the rain. Most of all, she remembered the calm certainty in Nathan's voice when he promised she would not wait alone. No board presentation had ever remained in her memory with such clarity. Her executive assistant entered carrying the day's schedule. "Your calendar is completely full until 6 o'clock this evening." Lauren looked toward the folder resting on her desk containing the field inspection report from the construction project. Attached to the final page was a handwritten note listing the names of local contractors who had worked nearby during the survey. She quietly found the name Nathan Carter beside the address of a small home repair and woodworking business. After a thoughtful pause, she closed the folder. "Please move my afternoon meetings to tomorrow." Her assistant looked surprised. "All of them?" Lauren smiled gently. "Yes, I need to visit someone." Less than an hour later, she parked her car several blocks away from Nathan's workshop, choosing not to arrive with a company driver or security staff. She wore a simple cream sweater, blue jeans, and comfortable walking shoes instead of the elegant white business suit she usually wore to work. She wanted nothing about her appearance to announce who she was. The modest workshop stood beside a quiet residential street, surrounded by maple trees already glowing with autumn colors. Fresh cedar filled the air before she even reached the front door. Inside, warm sunlight streamed through wide windows, illuminating carefully arranged tools, handcrafted furniture, and shelves lined with unfinished projects. Nathan was repairing an antique rocking chair, while soft country music played quietly from an old radio in the corner. He looked up as the door opened and immediately recognized her. His expression carried genuine surprise followed by a warm smile. "Your ankle looks much better." Lauren returned the smile. "Thanks to a patient stranger who refused to let me make it worse." Nathan laughed softly. "I only encouraged you to stay still." Before either of them could continue, the front door opened again, and a cheerful 12-year-old boy hurried inside, carrying a soccer backpack nearly as large as himself. "Dad," Coach said. He stopped mid-sentence after noticing the visitor. Nathan smiled proudly. "Lauren, this is my son, Mason." "Mason, this is the lady I told you about from the construction site." Mason politely extended his hand exactly as his father had taught him. "It is nice to meet you." Lauren shook his hand with a smile that felt unexpectedly natural. "It is nice to meet you too." She quietly watched the easy conversation between father and son while Nathan asked about school, soccer practice, and a science project due the following week. Every question was answered with patience. Every response received full attention. Nathan never glanced toward his phone. He never hurried the conversation. Lauren realized she had attended thousands of business meetings where people interrupted one another constantly. Yet this simple exchange inside a modest woodworking shop felt more valuable than many executive decisions she had witnessed. As she looked around the peaceful room filled with handcrafted furniture, afternoon sunlight, and quiet laughter between a devoted father and his son, Lauren understood that the greatest success she had encountered all week had nothing to do with corporate achievements. It was measured instead by the way one good man built a life where kindness was practiced every ordinary day without anyone ever applauding it. Over the following week, Lauren found herself returning to Nathan's workshop more often than she intended, always finding a practical excuse that sounded ordinary enough to avoid suspicion. One afternoon, she arrived carrying a weathered wooden keepsake box with a loose hinge. Another morning, she stopped by asking whether he could restore an old porch swing that had belonged to her late grandparents. Nathan never questioned why she kept returning. He simply welcomed her with the same quiet smile that had first greeted her beneath the cedar tree during the storm. He charged fair prices, explained every repair honestly, and treated her no differently than anyone else who walked through his front door. The more time Lauren spent there, the more she noticed things that could never be measured on a financial statement. Every elderly customer received patient attention, no matter how small the repair. Every child who visited left carrying a tiny carved wooden animal Nathan had crafted from leftover pieces of cedar. Every conversation ended with gratitude instead of salesmanship. One bright Saturday morning, an elderly veteran entered the shop carrying a broken wooden flag display case that had belonged to his father. He quietly explained that money was tight after unexpected medical bills and asked whether the repair could wait until next month. Nathan carefully examined the damaged frame before smiling warmly. Some things deserve to be restored as soon as possible. The older man reached into his wallet, but Nathan gently raised his hand. "Please keep your money for your family. I will have this ready by Tuesday." The veteran's eyes filled with appreciation. "I do not know how to thank you," Nathan simply replied. "Tell someone else they matter when they least expect to hear it." Lauren stood silently near a bookshelf pretending to examine handcrafted picture frames, yet every word settled deeply inside her heart. She had spent years funding charitable programs through million-dollar donations, but she realized genuine generosity often appeared through quiet moments that never reached newspaper headlines. Later that afternoon, Mason returned from soccer practice carrying a backpack and an enormous smile. "Dad, Coach says our team can volunteer at the community food drive next weekend." Nathan immediately nodded. "Then we will be there." Mason looked toward Lauren. "Would you like to come too?" Lauren laughed softly at the unexpected invitation. "I would love to." Nathan smiled with quiet approval before returning to the rocking chair he had been repairing. As sunlight streamed through the workshop windows, Lauren found herself watching the peaceful rhythm of their lives unfold naturally. There was no luxury, no corporate prestige, and no impressive title inside those walls. Yet there was laughter, patience, honesty, and a sense of belonging she had not experienced in years. She wanted to tell Nathan who she really was. Several times the words reached her lips before she quietly swallowed them again. She feared that revealing her identity too soon would change the simple friendship that had begun to grow between them. What she treasured most was the certainty that Nathan saw only the woman standing before him, not the executive whose name appeared on magazine covers and corporate reports. As she prepared to leave that evening, Nathan handed her the restored keepsake box with careful hands. "It should last another generation now," he said with quiet satisfaction. Lauren gently traced the smooth polished wood before looking into his eyes. "You seem to repair more than furniture." Nathan smiled without fully understanding what she meant. Sometimes people simply need someone willing to take the time. Driving home beneath streets lined with golden maple trees, Lauren realized she was no longer visiting the workshop because of curiosity. She was returning because, for the first time in many years, she had found a place where nobody expected anything from her except honesty, kindness, and the willingness to share another ordinary afternoon. Nearly 2 weeks after the storm, Mitchell Innovations announced a community partnership fair designed to connect large corporations with local family-owned businesses throughout Seattle. Hundreds of small contractors, craftsmen, and neighborhood entrepreneurs received invitations to display their work before potential commercial partners. Nathan almost declined the opportunity, believing larger companies would have little interest in a modest woodworking and home repair business. Mason refused to let him stay home. "You always tell me that opportunities deserve respect even when they look impossible," the 12-year-old reminded him with a grin. Nathan laughed and surrendered. "I suppose I did say that." Early Saturday morning, they carefully loaded handcrafted furniture, restored antique chairs, and several cedar display shelves into the back of the old pickup truck before driving downtown together. Meanwhile, Lauren stood inside the convention center reviewing final preparations with senior executives. Although she remained the chief executive officer, she had quietly instructed her staff that every exhibitor should receive identical booth space regardless of company size or annual revenue. "Every business here matters," she reminded the organizing committee. "Treat every owner with equal respect." Several executives exchanged polite smiles, noticing how much their leader had changed over the past few weeks. Shortly before the event officially opened, Lauren glanced across the exhibition floor and immediately recognized Nathan arranging handcrafted furniture inside one of the smallest booths near the back of the hall. Mason proudly polished each display while greeting visitors with cheerful enthusiasm. Lauren smiled to herself, but deliberately chose not to approach immediately. She wanted Nathan's work to speak before her position ever influenced anyone's opinion. Throughout the morning, dozens of visitors stopped to admire the quality of his craftsmanship. Many complimented the smooth finishes, sturdy construction, and careful attention to detail. Shortly after noon, one executive from Mitchell Innovations paused at Nathan's booth before picking up a handcrafted cedar bookshelf. He examined the workmanship with obvious admiration. "Who built this?" Nathan answered simply, "I did." The executive nodded thoughtfully before reading the business registration form lying on the table. Suddenly, his expression changed. "Nathan Carter?" Nathan smiled politely. "That is right." Before the conversation could continue, another executive hurried toward them carrying a tablet computer. "Mr. Carter, the chief executive officer would like to personally meet you in the executive presentation suite." Nathan looked confused. "Me?" "Immediately, if possible." Mason's eyes grew wide with excitement. "Dad, this must be something important." Nathan quietly followed the executives through the convention center without understanding why he had been singled out. As the elevator doors opened onto the executive floor, he stepped into an elegant conference room overlooking the Seattle skyline. Floor-to-ceiling windows reflected bright afternoon sunlight, while senior leadership quietly stood around a polished conference table. At the far end of the room stood Lauren, dressed once again in her elegant white business suit. Nathan stopped walking. For several silent seconds, he simply looked at her, then at the company logo displayed behind her, and finally back into her eyes. Pieces of the past 2 weeks quietly came together. The formal title spoken during the rescue, her unexplained familiarity with corporate projects, the confidence she carried even while pretending to be an ordinary customer. Lauren slowly stepped toward him with calm honesty written across her face. "Nathan," she said softly, "there is something I should have told you from the very beginning." Nathan remained composed, neither angry nor afraid, simply waiting. Lauren took one quiet breath before continuing. "I am Lauren Mitchell, and I am the Chief Executive Officer of Mitchell Innovations." The room became completely silent. Outside the windows, the city moved as it always had, unaware that inside one quiet conference room the truth had finally arrived. Nathan looked at the woman he had once helped beneath a cedar tree and realized that although her title explained many mysteries, it changed nothing about the kindness he had seen in her eyes on that rainy afternoon. Silence settled across the executive conference room as afternoon sunlight reflected from the Seattle skyline onto the polished wooden table between Nathan and Lauren. Senior executives quietly exchanged uncertain glances, expecting surprise, frustration, or disappointment from the humble craftsman standing before one of the most influential business leaders in the state. Instead, Nathan simply smiled with the same calm expression Lauren had seen on the rainy afternoon when they first met beneath the cedar trees. He looked at her for a long moment before speaking gently. "So that explains why everyone suddenly became nervous when you walked into the room." A few people laughed quietly, the tension immediately beginning to fade. Lauren smiled with visible relief, though guilt still lingered in her eyes. "I should have told you sooner." Nathan nodded thoughtfully. "Perhaps." He glanced briefly toward the company logo behind her before looking back into her eyes. "But the woman I met during the storm was real too." Lauren felt her shoulders relax for the first time all day. "She was." Nathan continued calmly. "You were cold. Your ankle hurt. You accepted help when you needed it. None of those things were pretending." Lauren lowered her eyes for a moment. "I was afraid that once you learned who I was, everything would change." Nathan quietly folded his hands in front of him. "Titles explain responsibilities. They do not explain character." The words settled gently across the room. Several executives looked at one another without speaking. They had spent years discussing leadership through numbers, market share, and quarterly performance. Hearing a simple craftsman define leadership in one quiet sentence left a deeper impression than many corporate seminars. Lauren stepped a little closer. "Are you angry with me?" Nathan shook his head. "No." He smiled kindly. "I wish you had trusted me sooner, but I understand why you did not. People probably see your position long before they see you." Lauren gave a slow nod. "Almost every day." Nathan looked toward the conference room windows where sunlight reflected across the city below. "That sounds lonely." She did not answer immediately because no one inside the company had ever described her success that way. They admired her achievements. They respected her decisions. They rarely asked whether she felt alone. His quiet understanding reached her more deeply than any apology could have. Just then Mason stepped into the conference room after being escorted upstairs by an assistant. His eyes widened as he looked around the elegant executive floor before finding his father. "Dad, is everything okay?" Nathan smiled immediately. "Everything is fine." Mason turned politely toward Lauren. "Hello again." Lauren returned the warm smile. "I am glad you came." She knelt slightly, so they stood at the same height. "Your father has been teaching me something important." Mason looked curious. "What is that?" Lauren answered honestly. "That kindness is worth more than reputation." Mason grinned proudly before looking at his father. "I already knew that." Soft laughter filled the room once more. Lauren then looked back toward Nathan with quiet sincerity. "There is something I would like to ask." Nathan listened patiently. "Our company sponsors hundreds of community improvement projects every year, but I think we have forgotten how important small businesses and local families truly are. Would you be willing to help me understand what they actually need?" Nathan looked genuinely surprised. "You are asking a carpenter to advise a corporation?" Lauren smiled. "I am asking the man who stayed when everyone else walked away." Nathan remained silent for several thoughtful seconds before answering. "If it helps ordinary families, I will gladly share what I have learned." Lauren felt hope quietly replace regret. She realized she had expected forgiveness, yet what Nathan offered instead was something even more valuable. He offered trust, and in that peaceful executive conference room overlooking Seattle, both of them understood that real leadership did not begin with authority. It began with the simple decision to remain beside another person when leaving would have been easier. The weeks that followed quietly transformed both Mitchell Innovations and the lives connected to it in ways no executive report could fully capture. Instead of limiting their conversations to occasional meetings, Lauren invited Nathan to visit neighborhoods where small business owners, family contractors, and local craftsmen struggled to compete against larger corporations. She asked him not to prepare speeches or presentations. "I only want you to tell me what you see," she explained. Nathan agreed on one condition. "If we're going to help people, we should spend more time listening than talking." Lauren smiled because she recognized the quiet wisdom behind those words. Together, they visited family-owned bakeries, neighborhood hardware stores, repair shops, community centers, and local woodworking businesses throughout Seattle. Nathan greeted every owner with genuine respect because he understood their daily challenges from personal experience. Lauren noticed something remarkable. People spoke more openly when Nathan stood beside her. They were not intimidated by corporate titles because the humble carpenter naturally made every conversation feel equal. One elderly shop owner quietly admitted that rising supply costs had nearly forced him to close the business his family had operated for 3 generations. A young single mother explained that finding affordable equipment loans had become almost impossible. A mechanic described how large companies often ignored skilled local workers despite their decades of experience. Lauren filled an entire notebook with observations instead of statistics. For the first time in many years, she measured success by listening rather than speaking. A month later, Mitchell Innovations announced a completely redesigned community partnership program based upon everything they had learned together. Small businesses would receive fair contract opportunities, flexible payment schedules, affordable equipment financing, and mentorship instead of complicated corporate requirements that discourage participation. During the announcement, several reporters praised Lauren's innovative leadership. She quietly shook her head before answering. "The best ideas rarely begin inside executive offices. Sometimes they begin inside small workshops where people solve real problems every single day." Nathan watched the interview from the back of the room beside Mason, hoping nobody would notice him. Recognition had never interested him. Seeing ordinary families receive genuine opportunities mattered much more. Later that afternoon, Lauren stopped by the woodworking shop, carrying 2 paper bags filled with sandwiches from Mason's favorite neighborhood deli. They shared lunch around the same sturdy workbench where Nathan repaired furniture every afternoon. Mason eagerly described his upcoming science fair, while Lauren listened with genuine interest, asking thoughtful questions about his project. Nathan quietly observed the easy conversation unfolding between them. There was no awkwardness anymore. Lauren no longer seemed like a visitor entering their lives. She had gradually become someone who belonged there. As the afternoon sunlight filtered through the workshop windows, Lauren looked around the familiar room with peaceful appreciation. "You know," she said softly, "I used to believe leadership meant always being the strongest person in the room." Nathan smiled while carefully sanding the edge of a cedar cabinet door. "And now?" Lauren looked toward Mason, laughing as he organized small jars of wood screws by size. "Now I think leadership begins by making sure nobody has to carry life's hardest moments alone." Nathan nodded with quiet approval, because those words reflected everything he had hoped she would discover on her own. Outside, autumn leaves drifted gently across the sidewalk, while neighbors greeted one another with warm smiles. Inside the little workshop, surrounded by the scent of cedar and the comforting sound of ordinary conversation, Lauren realized she had spent years searching for better ways to build successful companies. She never imagined the greatest lesson would come from a single father who had simply chosen to remain beside a stranger during one rainy afternoon when everyone else believed walking away was the easier choice. As winter slowly gave way to the first signs of spring, the partnership between Mitchell Innovations and hundreds of local businesses had already begun transforming neighborhoods across Seattle. Empty storefronts reopened. Family workshops hired new apprentices. Community projects that had waited for years finally received support. Yet among all those visible successes, the greatest change remained invisible to everyone except the people who mattered most. Lauren found herself spending less time inside executive dining rooms and more evenings around the sturdy wooden table in Nathan's home. Mason welcomed those evenings with contagious enthusiasm. Every Wednesday had quietly become family dinner night, though nobody had ever officially decided it. Nathan prepared simple homemade meals, while Mason proudly experimented with desserts that were sometimes imperfect, but always made with determination. Lauren often arrived carrying fresh bread or fruit from neighborhood markets instead of expensive gifts. She quickly learned that the greatest compliment she could receive was hearing Nathan say, "You did not need to bring anything. We were already happy you were coming." One quiet evening after dinner, they walked together through a nearby community park where volunteers had recently planted dozens of young maple trees through the new partnership program. Children laughed across the playground while elderly neighbors rested on freshly restored wooden benches built by Nathan and several local craftsmen. Lauren paused beside one of the benches and gently ran her hand across the smooth cedar surface. A small brass plaque had been attached to the side. It read, "Built by neighbors, for neighbors." She smiled softly. "Your work is everywhere now." Nathan shook his head. "Not mine." He looked toward families enjoying the peaceful evening. "Everyone helped build this." Mason skipped ahead along the walking path before suddenly turning back toward the two adults. "Come on. You are walking too slowly." Lauren laughed as Nathan smiled. "I thought you once told me there was no prize for pretending to move faster than we should." Mason grinned. "That only counts during soccer practice." They continued walking beneath rows of blossoming trees until they reached a small footbridge overlooking a quiet stream. The gentle sound of flowing water filled the evening air while the city skyline glowed softly in the distance. Lauren leaned lightly against the wooden railing and looked toward Nathan. "Do you remember what you told me the day we met?" Nathan thought for a moment before smiling. "I said you would not be waiting alone." Lauren nodded slowly. "I did not realize then that you were talking about much more than that afternoon." Nathan remained silent, allowing her to continue. "For years I believed success meant never needing anyone. Now I understand that real strength sometimes begins by allowing someone to stay." Nathan looked at her with quiet warmth. "And sometimes it begins by deciding to stay yourself." Lauren smiled through grateful eyes. She understood exactly what he meant. Staying had become a choice they both made every day, not because either of them needed to be rescued anymore, but because life had become richer when shared. As they walked back toward the neighborhood, Mason reached naturally for Lauren's hand while continuing an enthusiastic story about his upcoming science competition. She listened with genuine attention, laughing at every animated detail. Nathan watched the simple moment unfold beneath the soft evening sky and quietly realized something beautiful had happened without anyone planning it. The woman who had once been a stranger stranded in the rain had become part of the ordinary rhythm of their lives. There had been no grand promises, no dramatic declarations, only countless small choices built upon kindness, trust, respect, and the quiet decision to never leave one another behind when life became difficult. 1 year later, another autumn rain quietly returned to Seattle, falling gently across sidewalks lined with golden maple leaves, as though the seasons themselves wished to remember the afternoon that had changed 3 lives forever. Mitchell Innovations had become known not only for innovation, but also for the way it invested in people before profits. Small businesses flourished, neighborhood craftsmen found new opportunities, and countless families discovered that one corporation had finally learned to listen before leading. Whenever reporters praised Lauren for the transformation, she always answered with the same quiet smile. "The greatest lesson I ever learned did not come from a boardroom. It came from someone who refused to walk away." Across town, Nathan's woodworking shop remained almost exactly as it had been on the day Lauren first stepped inside. The scent of fresh cedar still filled the air. Handcrafted furniture still rested beneath warm afternoon sunlight streaming through wide windows. Mason had grown taller, but he still stopped by the workshop after school, happily helping his father organize tools before beginning homework at the familiar workbench. Some evenings Lauren joined them without calling ahead. She never arrived with security vehicles or company assistance anymore. Most often, she carried a homemade dessert or fresh bread from the neighborhood bakery, smiling before Nathan even opened the front door. Those ordinary evenings slowly became the moments she treasured most. One Saturday, the community gathered at the park where the young maple trees they had planted months earlier now stood stronger and taller, their branches dancing gently beneath a cool autumn breeze. Families filled the walking paths while children laughed across the playground, and local musicians played soft acoustic songs beneath a nearby pavilion. Nathan, Lauren, and Mason volunteered together throughout the afternoon, helping neighbors assemble picnic tables that Nathan had handcrafted for the park. As the final table was secured, an elderly woman quietly approached Lauren. "You are the lady from the company that helped reopen my family's little bakery," she said warmly. "Thank you." Lauren smiled before gently shaking her head. "Please thank the carpenter standing over there. He taught me what helping people truly means." The woman looked toward Nathan with grateful eyes before walking over to thank him as well. Nathan listened politely before smiling in his familiar, quiet way. The community built this together. As the afternoon faded into evening, the three of them remained sitting on one of the cedar benches overlooking the peaceful park. Rain clouds drifted slowly across the horizon, carrying the same gentle promise of another autumn shower. Mason looked toward Lauren with a thoughtful smile. "Do you know something funny?" She laughed softly. "Probably not." He pointed toward the walking trail where they had just finished volunteering. "The first time Dad told me about you, he said he met a brave lady who could not walk because of her ankle." Lauren smiled at the memory. "I remember." Mason grinned even wider. "Now you walk farther than both of us." Nathan laughed quietly before looking toward Lauren. "Sometimes healing begins with an injured ankle." Lauren shook her head gently. "No." She reached for Nathan's hand with calm certainty. "Healing begins when someone decides that another person is worth waiting for." Their eyes met beneath the quiet autumn sky while the first light raindrops began falling across the park once again. Nothing about that moment felt extraordinary to the people passing nearby. They simply saw three people sitting together on a wooden bench, smiling as rain softly touched the leaves above them. Yet those who truly understood kindness would have recognized something far more remarkable. A lonely chief executive officer had found a family because one single father chose compassion over convenience. A devoted father had discovered that genuine love respected his quiet dignity instead of changing it. A young boy had witnessed that the strongest people are never remembered for how quickly they move through life, but for the gentle promise they keep when they refuse to leave someone behind. And beneath the peaceful Seattle rain, that promise became the foundation of a home built not from wealth or success, but from grace, trust, and enduring love.